crucifixion. Pinioned, as if to eternity, your palms bleed anguish, and the sword's entry in your side feels to murder hope. Darkness falls, as darkness must. Your mother's tears spill, the women gather, yet the bolder readying release, presaged in our souls, understands the crucial paradox that is brutal death and divine rebirth, fully present in this outlined moment.
It's Good Friday. When the dawn came on that morning, it was already clear that Jesus would die. There was a long walk to the cross. There was a painful death. And then there was an earthquake. And then silence. Every year across the world, Christians gather to mark Good Friday. Originally, the word was God Friday in Old English, but came to be known as Good Friday. The temples, the sanctuaries in which we worship are stripped bare. No more banners, no more stoles, no more crosses. There is sorrow, and there is silence, but there is also presence and meaning. So thank you for joining Roncesvalles United Church for our Good Friday service for 2021.
Please join me in our opening prayer. Loving God, our source and our guide, today we pause to remember the story of Christ's death on the cross, reminding us of your endless, eternal presence in the darkest moments of life.
In our despair, you are our light. In our fear, you lead us to still waters of peace. In our endings, you offer us a new day. And in our loneliness, you assure us that we are never alone.
As we recall the suffering of your Son, remind us that the pain and sorrow of this world gives way always to your love, lived with the courage and conviction of Christ.
With gratitude to you, our eternal light, we say, Amen.
I'm reading to Matthew chapter 27, verses 45 to 51, and Luke chapter 23, verse 46. The death of Jesus. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land, until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "This man is calling for Elijah." At once one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave him to drink. But the others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. Luke chapter 23. Then Jesus came in a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit."
The question that is asked on Good Friday, in every age, in every place, in every church, among people who don't attend church, is, quite simply, where was the hand of God? Where was the hand of God? As Christ, as Jesus was walking through the streets, being jeered or cheered by the crowds, carrying the heavy cross on his aching and battered back, as Christ was hoisted up into the air onto that cross, crucifixion, a damning kind of death in times of Roman times, a person who had violated the laws of his own society, as Christ was dying there in ignominy. Where was the hand of God? We ask that question every year, in every place, in every time since Christian history began. The fact of the matter is that we find it hard to find meaning in the idea of crucifixion, especially crucifixion of someone who is innocent. And make no mistake, while we talked about the passion of Christ, of Jesus for social justice on Palm Sunday, this passion, the Greek word for suffering is passion, is very different. Here is Christ who has dedicated himself, a peasant himself, to freeing the peasants from the tyranny of the temple, from the tyranny of the government, from the tyranny of the spiritually crushing idea that you had to go through someone else, that you had to obey certain rules and laws, that you had to make sacrifices in certain ways, that you had to behave in a certain manner to be worthy of the attention and the love of God. Jesus, who dedicated himself to the idea of everyone's value, of everyone's spiritual well-being and agency. It's so hard to think, why would God bring such a beautiful story to such a horrific end? We struggle to make sense, and it is no wonder that Good Friday is the least attended service in the Protestant Church. Who wants to be told that story and have to struggle once more with this unconditionally loving God who somehow seems to go bipolar in this moment and allow his son to be crucified? Not just allow it, but make it part of the plan. We'll be talking about that theology again on Easter morning, but right now we need to stay with the sorrow and the despair of Good Friday, with that all-important and pressing and hard and difficult question: where was the hand of God in this? And it isn't hard to apply it to our own time, is it? We look at other crucifixions. We look at other people who have died because of the imperial system they live in, that counts them as not valuable, that counts them as a nuisance, that counts them as expendable. We look at the missing and lost Indigenous women. We look at the women of the Asia community who were just a few weeks ago shot and killed. We look at so many people in so many places who are simply asking for equality for all, for dignity for all, for value for all, for oppressive systems to recognize compassion and lead with love. and who are in different ways eliminated, in different ways executed, in different ways experience a crucifixion. And in those moments, we feel our own kind of cross, the crucifixion that is the death of hope in the world. There is no question that placing this difficult story at the center of Christian theology makes for a difficult Christian story. We so often wonder, why was this necessary? As I say, where was the hand of this loving God in this story? And yet the fact of the matter is that the crucifixion itself was a continuation of everything that Jesus was passionate about. Because as Jesus would teach us, everything that we want for ourselves is what God wants for us. But we can't get that through following the rules of the world. We can't get that through amassing fame or items or wealth or prestige or reputation. Jesus would say over and over, the imperialistic system in which you live, this impressive system that tells you that you are what you have, or you are what you do, or you are what other people think of you, that's what's crucifying you. Jesus needed to say, in fact, it's when we give up on those imperialistic ideas, when we turn over the story to God, that something truly meaningful and better can happen. I remember growing up with the story of the crucifixion and realizing that it was often glossed over, or it was treated as a piece of theology which seemed specifically designed to make me miserable, to make me feel lesser. Now I know as an adult that it wasn't for 1,000 years of Christian history, not till the year 1100, that Anselm, God bless him, came up with this idea that human beings were so flawed, so apart from God, that we had transgressed so greatly that the only thing that could bring us into right relationship with God again was the sacrifice of something pure, the most wonderful, pure, perfect thing, which was God's Son. I am such a miserable sinner that nothing short of Christ's execution and suffering on the cross can save me. For 1,000 years we have lived with that. For 1,000 years we have suffered through that. And for 1,000 years we have been left with these feelings of guilt around that. And yet what loving God brings his hand into the world to leave us in suffering and guilt? Didn't make sense to me. It wasn't until I really started to look at the life of Jesus that the crucifixion started to come into real view. Jesus is showing through his life that there is so much more to the world and to God and to ourselves than we see. There is so much more available to us. There is a hum of reverence in the world. There is a guide that walks beside us. There is a God that has limitless potential for us and limitless ideas about how things can go. And what we need to do is to hand it over to that God. So in the crucifixion, for me, Christ was saying, hand it over to God. In those dark times, in those difficult times, in those times when you felt that the suffering has been too great, in the times when you felt that the loss has been too much, hand it over to God. Because when it leaves our hands and enters the hands of God, that's when we see things change. That's when we find something different and greater than we could imagine. That's when God takes the suffering out of our hands and says, I can show you what freedom looks like. Freedom from imperialism, freedom from thinking your value comes from outside you, freedom from thinking that anything that happens is without meaning, because I can take any sorrow, any death, any problem, any worry, any anxiety, anything that is broken, and when you place it into my hands, I can give it back to you healed. So even when human beings chose to kill on the cross someone who simply preached compassion and love and God in the world, God could take that from us in the moment when we couldn't see how to go forward and give it back to us in a new way. Christ's mission didn't end with Christ's death. In fact, what happened was a kind of pollinization that spread across the world. It was a spreading of something that preached that we, in fact, individually can be in relationship with God. After the resurrection, after the stories began to spread, it stopped being about Christ and his disciples' teaching and began person by person sharing those stories, widening that circle, spreading that message, until the world began to waken up to this new idea that God is available here, and that if we open our hands and give over our sorrows and the ways in which we human beings fail each other and ourselves, and the things that we do that cause harm, if we open our hands and give those fears and desperation to God, then we begin to see God's hand. It reminds me of a saying my grandmother used to use so often that I should have applied to this story much earlier. Those who leave everything in the hands of God will soon start to see the hand of God in everything. The imperial world killed Jesus. But God did not let the message or the beauty or the wonder of Jesus' mission on earth end. It was taken into the world in miraculous new ways. Just as I can see that, every one of us mourns the loss of our indigenous women, of those Asian women, of anyone who ends up dying because of a crushing and oppression system that they live in that does not value anyone's life. While we mourn them and wish that they had not been lost, can be used so that we cannot bring harm in the future, so that we can bring God's love more greatly. The sad thing is sometimes it takes a crucifixion for us to finally give up thinking that we can control and rule the world and give over control to a higher and better and wiser power than our own. It is only when we are brought to our knees that we will allow ourselves to be helped. And only when we are broken beyond help that we can remember that God has ways for us to be resurrected that we have not dreamed of yet. Was God's hand in the crucifixion of Christ? God's hand was in the mission of love that Christ brought to the world. And when his followers had no choice in those long 3 days between the death and the resurrection, but to give over all of their hopes and dreams to God, to give their brokenness, their sorrow, their disappointment to their higher power, that's when God took the situation and their lives and that mission into God's hands and turned it into something that would amaze through history. Good Friday is a difficult time, but it reminds us over and over and over in the places that we find most painful. We don't have to see it as the end. We can see it as the moment when we can no longer trust our own ways of doing. We have to hand it over to the God who loves us, and guides us, and has something better in store for us. Crucifixion is followed by resurrection. But in between, there's that time where we are befuddled and bewildered, wondering where the hand of God is. And God says to us so clearly in that broken time, I'm holding out my hands. Give your life and your love to me. And together, we will amaze the world by rising again. Thanks be to God.
I see the stars.
Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thy is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.